The firing detail had already formed near the prison yard wall when Eisenhower's convoy burst through the camp gate, scattering dust across the waiting prisoners and forcing every guard to turn. A German officer stood with his hands bound, accused of betraying his own men, yet Eisenhower ignored the shouting crowd and walked straight to the table where one unsigned order lay beside a stopwatch, because the paper carried a detail no execution officer had noticed. The execution had been scheduled for dawn, but delays in the prisoner yard pushed it close to noon, when the whole camp was awake enough to hear the boots moving across the gravel. The condemned man was Major Klaus Richter, a German officer accused by his own prisoner council of informing American guards about a hidden escape tunnel beneath Barrack 6. The camp commandant had approved a disciplinary transfer, but a separate execution order appeared that morning with German witness signatures already attached. Captain Harold Mason, the American officer on duty, did not like the order from the moment it reached his desk. It claimed Richter had attacked 2 German prisoners during the night and had admitted collaboration with the Americans, yet the attached statements looked too clean, too organized, and too quickly prepared. Before Mason could delay the procedure, the German prisoner council demanded that the sentence be carried out immediately to prevent a riot. Richter was brought into the yard with his coat torn and one cheek swollen, but he did not argue with the accusations. He kept looking toward the administration building as if expecting someone inside it to understand what the others had missed. Several prisoners shouted at him from behind the guard line, calling him a traitor, while the council leader, Colonel Ernst Vogel, stood beside the witness table with a calm face and a folder pressed under his arm. The conflict sharpened when Mason noticed that the execution order carried no proper American authorization, only a temporary camp stamp and 3 German witness marks. Vogel insisted that the Americans had already accepted internal German discipline in limited cases and that refusing now would make the entire camp unmanageable. Mason answered that no man would be taken to the wall until every signature was checked, but the yard was already moving toward violence. A runner was sent toward headquarters, but the telephone line went dead minutes later. Mason ordered a second runner to use a jeep, and Vogel immediately accused him of protecting Richter. The crowd surged forward when the accusation was translated, and guards had to push prisoners back without striking them. Mason knew that if he waited too long, the yard itself might deliver the punishment before any officer could stop it. Then Eisenhower arrived 5 minutes before the scheduled moment. His convoy came through the gate fast, and the crowd shifted in confusion as American officers jumped from the vehicles. Eisenhower did not ask for a speech, a salute, or a full report. He walked to Mason, took the execution order, and read the bottom line where the witness time had been written. The line said Richter confessed at 0405 hours. Eisenhower asked where Richter had been at that time, and Mason answered that the infirmary log placed him under medical watch after a Barrack fight. Vogel immediately claimed the log was mistaken, but Eisenhower ordered both the infirmary record and the night guard report brought to the table. The execution stopped not because Richter had been cleared, but because one line had created a question no one in the yard could ignore. Subscribe for more forgotten German POW stories like this one. The escalation began when the infirmary log arrived and showed that Richter had been treated from 0350 to 0430, the same period during which the execution order claimed he confessed in Barrack 6. Vogel argued that Richter could have spoken before treatment and that clerks often wrote times incorrectly during night disturbances. Eisenhower did not answer the explanation directly, but ordered every record from the previous night placed on the table in chronological order. The night guard report created the next problem. It showed 2 alarms between 0315 and 0440, one near the infirmary and another near the tool shed behind Barrack 6. The supposed confession was not mentioned in either entry. Mason called the night guard forward, and the man stated that Richter had been carried to the infirmary after being beaten by several prisoners, not after attacking anyone. The accusation had begun to tilt in the wrong direction. Vogel reacted quickly. He produced a second witness statement claiming Richter had revealed the tunnel location days earlier and had been punished only after prisoners discovered his betrayal. The new statement had 4 signatures instead of 3, which should have strengthened it. Instead, Eisenhower noticed that one name belonged to a prisoner who had been transferred to another camp 2 days earlier. The witness could not have signed the paper that morning. The escalation moved into Barak 6 when Eisenhower ordered guards to inspect the alleged tunnel. Prisoners shouted that Americans were using the inspection to protect a traitor, but the guards entered anyway and lifted the floorboards near the stove. Beneath them, they found a shallow trench, several broken tools, and a bundle of civilian clothing wrapped in canvas. The tunnel existed, which made Richter's danger worse, but it did not prove who exposed it. Mason searched the bundle and found a small notebook hidden inside one sleeve. The notebook contained names of prisoners assigned to dig, names assigned to distract guards, and names assigned to punish anyone who spoke too freely. Richter's name appeared on the last page, but not as an informer. It appeared under a heading that read, "Removed before departure." Eisenhower ordered Vogel separated from the prisoner council, and the yard changed immediately. Several German officers who had stood confidently behind him began looking toward the barracks rather than the table. Richter finally spoke and said he had discovered the escape plan only after seeing medical supplies stolen for the diggers. He had tried to report the theft to the infirmary orderly, not to the Americans, and that attempt had marked him as dangerous. The stolen medical supplies were found inside a locked footlocker belonging to one of Vogel's closest men. Bandages, antiseptic bottles, and morphine labels had been hidden beneath folded uniforms. The infirmary doctor confirmed that those supplies had gone missing during the same week that several prisoners claimed sickness to avoid work details. The tunnel had become more than an escape attempt. It had created a network of theft and control inside the camp. By late afternoon, the execution yard had turned into an investigation site. The wall still stood behind the table, the firing detail had been dismissed, and Richter remained under guard but alive. Eisenhower ordered every witness statement rewritten under American supervision, while Vogel watched from a separate pen as the case he expected to close before noon began opening in every direction. The major consequence arrived when the rewritten statements exposed that several prisoners had signed Vogel's order without knowing what it actually said. One believed he had signed a complaint about stolen supplies, another thought he was confirming a Barak fight, and a third admitted he had signed because Vogel's assistant stood beside him during morning count. The execution order had been assembled from fear, confusion, and carefully placed pressure. Eisenhower ordered a full prisoner council review, which meant every internal punishment from the previous month had to be checked. The camp staff brought out files that had rarely been examined together: work refusals, Barak discipline notes, medical complaints, missing property reports, and transfer requests. Patterns appeared within the first hour. Men who questioned Vogel were reassigned. Men who helped him received better Barak positions, and men listed as troublesome often lost male privileges through unexplained clerical changes. Richter's case became the center of a larger collapse. A kitchen worker testified that Vogel's men had taken extra rations for tunnel diggers and blamed the shortages on sick prisoners. A laundry worker admitted he had hidden civilian clothing in canvas bags marked for repair. A clerk revealed that several escape planners were scheduled for transfer the following week under false medical categories, which would have moved them closer to a rail junction. The consequence became personal when Richter identified one of the men who beat him near the infirmary. That man denied everything until the doctor produced the treatment notes from the night before. The injuries matched blunt strikes from a wooden tool handle, and the handle was later found behind the tool shed with cloth wrapped around one end. The evidence showed that Richter had been attacked before the confession supposedly occurred. Vogel attempted to regain control by claiming that Eisenhower was humiliating German prisoners for American display. Eisenhower ordered the crowd reduced, and allowed only witnesses, clerks, guards, and the accused men to remain near the table. The move removed Vogel's audience, which weakened him more than any argument. Without a crowd to stir, his words had nowhere to spread. The tunnel inspection continued into the evening. Engineers measured the trench and discovered that it had not been aimed outside the wire, but toward the drainage culvert leading under the supply road. That route would have allowed a small group to leave during truck movement and vanish among service vehicles. The escape plan was more advanced than Mason had believed, and the false execution had nearly silenced the one man who could disrupt it. A sealed packet was found inside the culvert entrance. It contained forged work passes, route notes, and a list of prisoners marked for departure after the execution. Richter's name appeared again, but this time beside a different instruction: final settlement before movement. The phrase made the doctor look away from the page, while Mason ordered Richter moved into protected custody. By nightfall, the consequence was impossible to contain. The camp had nearly executed a man under a false order, and that order was tied to an escape network, stolen medical supplies, forged passes, and a prisoner council using discipline as cover. Eisenhower ordered headquarters notified that no internal prisoner sentence would be accepted again without direct Allied review. The major reversal began before dawn, when one of Vogel's assistants asked to speak with Mason and claimed Richter had not been the first man selected for a false sentence. He said another prisoner, a quiet mechanic named Franz Keller, had vanished from Barrack 4 after refusing to repair the drainage culvert latch. The camp roster listed Keller as transferred for medical observation, but the assistant insisted he had never left the compound. The claim reversed the investigation from preventing one execution to searching for a missing witness. Eisenhower ordered the transfer office opened immediately and had Keller's file placed beside Richter's. The medical transfer line had no doctor's signature, only a clerk's mark copied from an older form. When the doctor examined it, he stated that Keller had never been scheduled for medical removal. The search moved through storage sheds, the laundry building, the tool room, and finally the coal cellar beneath the old kitchen. Guards found Keller behind stacked sacks, weak but alive, with his hands tied in front rather than behind him so he could still work on metal parts. Beside him sat a repaired culvert latch, a small file, and a map showing the supply road. He had been kept alive because the escape plan still needed his skill. That discovery destroyed Vogel's protection story completely. He had claimed the council punished traitors to preserve order, but Keller proved the council had imprisoned useful men, forced them to repair escape equipment, and prepared false paperwork to hide their absence. Richter had been scheduled to die because he had seen the medical theft. Keller had been hidden because he could repair the route. Eisenhower ordered Vogel brought to the coal cellar entrance and made him face Keller under guard. Vogel denied knowing Keller was there, but Keller identified the assistant who delivered food, the clerk who forged the transfer line, and the exact phrase Vogel used when ordering the culvert repaired. Each detail was checked against recovered notes from the tunnel bundle, and each one matched. The reversal deepened when Keller revealed that the escape was planned for that very night, using the confusion after Richter's execution as cover. The firing detail, the prisoner crowd, the transfer of the body, and the temporary opening of the service gate were all meant to distract guards long enough for 6 men to reach the culvert. Richter's death had been designed as a stage event to open a door. Eisenhower turned the plan back on them. He ordered the service gate left apparently unguarded, the culvert watched from both ends, and the prisoners connected to the escape kept in their normal barracks until movement began. Mason objected that waiting created risk, but Eisenhower answered that capturing the moving network would prove the entire structure better than another pile of statements. Near midnight, 6 prisoners slipped from Barrack 6 carrying small bundles. They reached the drainage culvert, crawled inside, and found American guards waiting beyond the bend with lanterns covered until the last moment. The escape collapsed without gunfire, and every man captured inside the culvert carried a document or tool connected to Vogel's plan. The reversal was complete because the execution Vogel created to hide the escape had instead exposed it. The final irreversible event began at sunrise, when Eisenhower ordered the camp assembled for a formal record rather than a punishment spectacle. The same yard where Richter had nearly been executed now held tables covered with witness statements, tunnel tools, forged medical forms, stolen supplies, the false execution order, Keller's repaired latch, and the papers recovered from the captured escape party. Every item was arranged in the order it had appeared. Richter was brought forward first, no longer bound for execution, but still guarded as a witness. Keller followed him slowly, supported by the infirmary orderly. The prisoners who had signed false statements were called one by one and required to identify which papers they had signed, what they believed those papers meant, and who stood beside them at the time. The record became public enough to end rumors, but controlled enough to prevent another mob. Vogel was placed before the table under guard. Eisenhower did not ask him for a confession. He asked the clerk to read the line that had stopped the execution, then asked the doctor to read Richter's infirmary time, then asked Keller to identify the culvert latch. The sequence left Vogel with no single point to deny. Each document supported another, and each witness closed a gap the false order had tried to exploit. The final danger came when one captured escape planner shouted that Keller had volunteered to help and that Richter deserved the sentence. Keller stepped forward before guards could silence him and placed his damaged hands on the table beside the latch. He said he repaired the mechanism because food was withheld and because he had been told Richter would die if he refused. The yard heard the connection clearly, and the last defense of the execution collapsed. Eisenhower ordered the prisoner council dissolved immediately. No German internal sentence, transfer recommendation, work assignment, or medical category would be accepted until reviewed by American officers and verified against independent records. The order did not merely punish Vogel. It removed the machinery that allowed him to turn prisoner authority into secret control. Vogel and his closest assistants were removed from the main compound before noon. Richter and Keller were placed in protected barracks, and every man who signed a false statement had to provide a new one under supervision. The execution wall remained in the yard, but the table before it now carried records instead of a sentence. That visual change mattered because everyone had seen how close paper had come to killing a man. The captured escape party was transferred separately under guard, with the tunnel tools and forged passes sealed as evidence. Engineers filled the culvert entrance and posted inspection markers along the supply road. By late afternoon, the route Vogel had built was no longer hidden. The men he used were no longer under his reach, and the false execution order had become the document that destroyed his authority. The irreversible event ended when Eisenhower signed a camp-wide directive and had it nailed to the notice board. It stated that no prisoner could be punished under internal authority without verified Allied review. Richter read it from the protected side of the yard, while Keller stood beside him holding the repaired latch as evidence. 5 minutes had prevented an execution, but the directive prevented the next one from ever reaching the wall. The firing detail never returned to the yard. By evening, the wall stood empty while clerks copied the directive and guards sealed the false order in an evidence packet. Richter walked past the place where he had been positioned that morning and stopped only long enough to look at the table where the one line had been read. Eisenhower's convoy left before sunset, but the order remained nailed beside the gate, and every prisoner who passed it knew that a hidden sentence could no longer move faster than the truth. Most people know how World War II ended. Very few know what happened inside these prison camps. Subscribe for more untold WW2 stories.